I will officially call the June the 8th board meeting to order, and we will open with a moment of silence. After the moment of silence, Mr. Gilmore will lead us in the pledge. So if we would, please stand for the moment of silence.
States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First on our agenda is approval of the agenda, and when we approve the agenda, we're also approving the consent agenda, so I'm looking for a motion to approve the agenda. Mr. Iverson makes the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second from Dr. Rouse. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
This time we go into the public comment section. I have no forms for public comment. We have two sections of public comment. One is for those on the agenda, and the other one is later at the end for non-agenda items, but since I have no applications for public comment, we'll move on to communications to the board from Dr. Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I'm going to ask Chairman Jones and Mrs. Rafalowski to join me down front. We're going to be recognizing our tenured teachers. We have two teachers from this year, and then because we didn't get to recognize our 2020 tenured teachers, we will do that. So, Mr. Jones, Ms. Rafalowski, if you'll join me down front,
We need
we'll
to
do.
vote on those first two first, or you want to vote on them last?
We can do it later.
Okay.
So this evening, as I said before, we will recognize our teachers who have become tenured. We had a recognition a couple of months ago, but we had two teachers who weren't able to be with us. And so at this time, I'd like to ask Amy Bridges and Jessica Hughes, who are in the 2021 class, to come forward. And so this certificate says, this certificate is proudly presented to Amy Bridges and Jessica Hughes, respectively, in recognition of your outstanding achievement of tenure status pursuant to the Tennessee Code annotated 49.5-5. It's signed by myself, David Cox, Director of Schools, Evelyn Rafalowski, Interim Director, and Mr. Randall Jones. So congratulations to both of you.
Thank you very much.
And again, I said that last year, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we were not able to have our 2020 tenured teachers here to recognize them. So we want to do that. We have a couple of folks from the 2020 class who couldn't be here this evening, and they'll be recognized at a later time. I'm going to call everybody's name, and as I call your name, if you would come forward and receive your certificate. Those who are not here, we'll just simply save them for a time of attending. So, all right, first up, Anna Armstrong. Megan Burke. Sarah Hayes. Tracy Huffman. Elizabeth Jones. Kayla Leonard. Mike McQueen. Shannon Pike. Alex Rader. Aaron Raw. Stephanie Ray. Derek McGee. Trevor Rumsey. Peggy Russell. Anthony Todd. Jessica Hoffman. Megan Thomas. Kathy Smith. Dawn Hancock. And Amy Kristen Smith. And finally, Leah Davis. All right, would you join me in recognizing these folks who have achieved the status of tenure for 2020?
Can we do the thing with let them get pictures? Can we get them up?
Oh, sure. So if you want to, family members who would like to take pictures, will,
Maybe
if you want to, why don't you come back around? So you can come behind the table. Come behind the table.
Oh, there's a table.
All right. Raise your hand if you need more picture time. All right. I think we're good then.
She's
Oh,
got.
hold on.
We got one more.
All right. So, the two from this year, would you all like to have come up and have a picture? You good? All right. Could I have Amber Anderson join me up here? As all of you know, the last 15 months or so have been hard for everyone, for lots of reasons. But one of the shining stars through all of this has been our nutrition staff who have worked tirelessly to feed kids. And their work has been so extraordinary, amassing a volunteer army and folks that delivered meals on buses to kids when the schools were shut down, also delivering food as part of the food bank to those families. Those efforts have, of course, we appreciate them, but they have captured the attention of the No Kid Hungry, which is a national campaign to stamp out hunger. So this evening, we're very pleased to present Sullivan County's Nutrition Department with an award, and it says this is from the Tennessee League of Hunger Heroes, Sullivan County Schools, School Nutrition Team, in recognition and sincere appreciation for your commitment to hunger relief and to your superhero determination to get kids the nutritious meals they need. Thank you for all you do for kids and their families, May 2021. And I'm going to present this to Amber Anderson, who is our supervisor for food service, and there's a letter that goes with that. And a plaque here that she can proudly display says, "I'm a hunger hero." And there's one more piece of bling that comes with that. And this is a very nice plaque, Ms. Anderson. It says, "Sullivan County Schools Nutrition Team. Thank you from the Hunger Heroes, No Kid Hungry, Tennessee." Thank you, and please accept this on the back. Mr. Jones, that completes the director's comments for the evening.
We move into the unfinished business section, and next is closing of schools, and I think Mr. Hull's going to give us a report on some schools here, and then we will have a recommendation for you after he does his presentation.
Okay, the first item is the Bluntville School property. I mentioned last time, and you're aware of the involvement there of the Masons who have been meeting there, and so we're trying to work out our obligation to them, and I've been in touch with their representative, so I'm positive about that. What I want to recommend tonight is that we do go ahead to get an appraisal and a survey on that property. As you're aware, that it's a little cloudy where the boundary lines are and all the lines. And of course, that's an old property. So I think that would be of value to the board in making decisions about what to do. No, we have not closed that school, and very much in process on what to do, but my recommendation is that we get an appraisal of that property, and we also get a survey.
Do you want to combine that one with Colonial Heights, or just wait?
Well, I'm gonna make the same motion or the recommendation on the Colonial Heights school property, so yes, we can combine them. I think we don't always do that, or maybe, I don't know if we've ever gotten appraisals on all of our properties, but I think these properties are sort of unique because of their location, and getting a better handle on the value there would help the board to make an informed decision. So yes, I'll make that recommendation on both of those school properties.
You have before you a recommendation from Mr. Hull that we get a survey and also an appraisal on both Colonial Heights Middle School and the Bluntville campus. So I'm looking for a motion and then a second. Mr. Hughes makes the motion to get the appraisal and a survey done. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Gilmore makes the second. So any discussion?
Do we want to consider, and I guess I might need to make an amendment, but do we want to put some kind of price range on that? I mean, because if we approve it open-ended, I just didn't know for budgeting purposes.
If you want to make an amendment to,
Well, I guess I would have a question for Mr. Holden. I think he mentioned last time a price range, but could we have some kind of ballpark on what we would expect on that?
I think 3,000 was what was mentioned. That
On the appraisals, 3,000 is a good estimate. I think that's what the appraiser said to me. On the surveys, that's a little less certain, because I think generally they do it either by the hour or so forth. They don't just give you a price for the job. I'll say again that on the Bluff City Middle School property, I think that one was about $4,500. That might be, that's just my memory. And that was very involved. It was very involved. So I don't anticipate that these would be that much. I tell you what I could do is get the go-ahead from Dr. Cox before I obligate any funds. But that's about as close as I can tell you, Mr. Spivey.
Okay, I just didn't know if we wanted to do a not to exceed amount.
Well, I understand that, and if you do, that's fine, and I'll work within whatever parameters you give me.
Okay.
So we have a motion and a second. Do we have any further discussion? If not, we're ready for roll call. Ms. King?
Mr. Gilmore,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
Yes.
Mr. Iverson,
Yes.
Mr. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Dr. Rouse,
Yes.
Mr. Spivey.
Yes.
Next item on the agenda is the Bishop property. You want to give us an update on that, Mr. Hull?
I do. As you will remember, this is the property that's across Lynn Road from West Ridge. And it is the property that was where the road was proposed. It would come through there. The county commission approved funding for us to buy that. I believe we have approved that. I have prepared an agreement, and I think we've gotten basically everybody's approval to sign off, and the seller's attorney has done that. There are two, I guess there's one item that I need to bring to your attention. Let's say it's customary, particularly in commercial purchases, and I guess I would classify this as a commercial purchase, to have some testing done, some geotechnical evaluations and testings before you close. So that is in the agreement, and we have a period, that would be, it's called a due diligence period, where we could choose to have geotechnical evaluations before we close. And obviously, one purpose for that would be, I think it's probably fair for me to say that it's has a reasonable chance of being a road property through there, but we would want to know, I guess, what we were looking at if we were going to use that property for that purpose. Now, I talked to Steve Wilson, who's my friend, and he is the structural engineer on our two buildings we've just completed, and very knowledgeable engineer. And he said, yes, that was something that was typically done, would be something that that we might want to know, and that might depend on our purposes in buying the property. But he put me in touch with another engineer at Foundations Systems Engineering, and I talked with him. He said primarily what he would recommend doing was some soil borings, which is again a sort of a typical thing. And the purpose of that, not only to have a better idea of what's under there, and I suppose you know if there's rock, you know if there's open spaces, you know if there's water. But he says it's important to know the kind of soil that might lend itself to your use or not. He said that it's important to know how wet it is. I wouldn't have guessed that one, but depending on the type of soil and the structure of what you run into, would dictate what kind of slopes you could have if you were grading and excavating. Some types of soil would not probably tolerate a steep road up through there, so that would be the purpose of that. He would also do a visual inspection. I can tell you, and Mr. Jones can tell you from our visual inspection, there's a lot of rock down at the bottom, but you know, that would be somewhat meaningful to him. He said that he would estimate that would run $10,000. And we would probably need to allow 60 days to get all that done. Now, don't necessarily know that it would take that long. And so then, you know, as I was summarizing with him and I went over the $10,000, I said, I understand that's an estimate. And he said, yeah, it would be, you'd be comfortable saying within plus or minus 2,000 of that. So there's a little variation on that number. But anyway, that's the projected price range on that. In some situations, the board might choose to just say, well, we want to buy it and not go through all that because we want to own it, regardless of what's in the substrata. So I think it's a decision the board needs to make, because of the budget and spending the funds, but also in terms of the amount of due diligence we want to do before closing the purchase. Now, we'll also have a final updated title examination done on it. We have typically gotten title insurance on these purchases, and I would recommend that. So I did send you a copy of my proposed agreement, and so I'm asking that you give final approval to moving forward with signing that agreement and moving on toward closing on that property. And I'm asking that you make a decision on if you want the geotechnical evaluation, and I guess if we do that, then my recommendation is that we fill in the blank there in the agreement with 60 days for our due diligence period.
Last month, or month before last, we approved the purchase of the Bishop property for $300,000 and asked the county commission to allow us to use our fund balance for that purpose, and they did give us approval for that. So at this point, I will entertain a motion to purchase the property with the core drilling being done, or I'll entertain a motion to purchase the property as is with no core drilling. And
I'll make that motion.
which one?
To purchase property with the core drilling with the up to 15,000.
Okay.
We just put a cap on it.
Mr. Iverson's made the motion to purchase the Bishop property with core drilling up to a cost of $15,000 max, and that would put us out 60 days then on the actual closing date. Do I have a second on that motion?
I'll second the motion.
Mr. Hughes seconds the motion. Any further discussion? If not, roll call, Ms. King.
Mr. Hughes,
Yes.
Mr. Iverson,
Yes.
Mr. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Dr. Rouse,
Yes.
Mr. Spivey,
Yes.
Mr. Gilmore.
Yes.
This time I'd like to make a statement about the Bluntville campus that was already discussed. There was an article in the Bristol paper, I believe on May the 28th, concerning the possibility of the county commission having an interest in the property. And if you want to go back and read that article, you could. But in that article, there was a statement made, asked of whether Joyce Crosswhite had discussed the resolution with Jones, chairman of the board. Crosswhite said she told him about it in advance of the commission meeting. She would not comment on his response, but hinted that it had been less than enthusiastic. I don't know if he was having a bad day, Crosswhite said, her voice trailing off in a long pause. That's the only thing I got to say. I want it clear with the school board for clarification. I had no conversation whatsoever with Ms. Crosswhite concerning the use of or the sale of the Bluntville campus. I've had two phone conversations with Ms. Crosswhite this year on February the 17th and February the 24th. Both of those conversations dealt with the access road from Lynn Road over to Jericho Drive. I don't know who she had a conversation with, but I wanted to clarify that. I did call the Bristol Courier reporter, and let her know that that was an inaccurate statement. But I wanted the board to know that, because I would never make a statement. I might be in a bad mood some days, but I would never make a statement like that. And I would share that with you if I did, but I wanted to clarify that with the board and let that go on record. At this time, we'll move on to new business. Dr. Cox.
Yes, Mr. Jones, members of the board, as we proceed into new business, item 7A is additional teacher tenure. As I mentioned before, we have two additional people. This does require a board vote, so having met all the necessary requirements, it is my recommendation that you approve the tenure for Jessica Hughes and Amy Bridges.
And if you don't, they have to turn their two certificates back in, so. I'll entertain a motion at this point.
motion, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hughes makes the motion, Mr. Iverson seconds. Any discussion? Roll call, Ms. King.
Mr. Iverson,
Yes.
Mr. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Dr. Rouse,
Yes.
Mr. Spivey,
Yes.
Mr. Gilmore,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes.
Yes.
Congratulations again. Next item under new business, item B, is the approval of the consolidated plan. This was presented in the work session. It is attached to your agenda. It's my recommendation that you approve the consolidated plan.
You have the recommendation from Dr. Cox to approve the consolidated plan. Do I have a motion on that?
I make that motion.
Dr. Rouse makes the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Iverson seconds the motion. Any discussion? If not, roll call. Ms. King?
Mr. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Dr. Rouse,
Yes.
Mr. Spivey,
Yes.
Mr. Gilmore,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
Yes.
Mr. Iverson.
Yes.
Thank you. Likewise, we discussed at the work session the differentiated pay plan, which is a requirement by the state of Tennessee. And I would respectfully recommend this evening that you would approve the differentiated pay plan so that we can submit that to the state.
You've heard the recommendation from Dr. Cox to approve the differentiated pay plan. Do I have a motion?
I make that motion.
Dr. Rouse makes the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Mr. Spivey seconds the motion. Is there any discussion? If not, roll call. Ms. King?
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Dr. Rouse,
Yes.
Mr. Spivey,
Yes.
Mr. Gilmore,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
Yes.
Mr. Iverson,
Yes.
Mr. Jones.
Yes.
Thank you. At the work session, also, Mrs. Rafalowski presented recommendations for the school start and end times, and also staggered start times for Westridge High School. Again, presented at the work session when we last met, and so we recommend those as presented from last time. So if it's the board's pleasure, my recommendation would be to ask you to approve item D and DA, which is the staggered start times for Westridge High School.
You've heard the recommendation from Dr. Cox concerning the school start times for this school year and also the staggered times for Westridge High School. Do I have a motion to approve that? And I will make an amendment when the motion comes through.
Motion, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hughes makes the motion.
Second.
Second from Mr. Iverson. Discussion. I would like to amend that motion to authorize Ms. Rafalowski to make any changes that she would see needed that we encountered during those first few days or week of school. Rather than call the special board meeting to change the time, 5 minutes, I think we need to authorize her and her lead team to make those decisions. Sometimes when you start running buses, you realize that there's a need to change time 5 minutes one way or the other or whatnot. And if we approve it without that authorization, we'd have to have a special call meeting, which would take us about 3 days to do. So I would like to amend that motion to authorize her to make a change if we encounter a problem and need to do that.
I'll second that.
Okay? We have the amendment. We have a second, and I assume you will accept that, Mr. Hughes, since you did
Yes.
the, okay. Any further discussion? Roll call, Ms. King.
Mr. Spivey,
Yes.
Mr. Gilmore,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
Yes.
Mr. Iverson,
Yes.
Mr. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Dr. Rouse.
Yes.
Thank you. The next item is budget amendments. Also, Mr. Loach spoke about that in the work session, and she did tell you that she was going to be working right up until meeting time, and she was true to that. And so you have additional items that are posted onto the agenda. And I would recommend approval of all the budget amendments. These are typical for this time of year as we close out a fiscal year. And so Mr. Loach is here to answer any questions if anyone has any.
You heard Dr. Koch's recommendation. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Gilmore makes the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Iverson. Any discussion? If not, roll call, Ms. King.
Mr. Gilmore,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
Yes.
Mr. Iverson,
Yes.
Mr. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Dr. Rouse,
Yes.
Mr. Spivey.
Yes.
Next item on the agenda is the entitled employee dismissal, and before Dr. Cox makes a statement and a recommendation here, I think it's important for me to outline the steps that are required legally for us to follow concerning any issues that we may have with personnel. We have a state law that says what the causes for teacher dismissal are, and that's incompetence, inefficiency, neglect of duty, unprofessional conduct, and insubordination. If those charges are made by the superintendent to the board has the option of accepting the charges or not accepting the charges. That's step one. Step two then, if those charges are accepted, the hearing goes to a hearing authority, and the hearing authority is hearing officer rather. The hearing officer is someone who's on the state approved list, and that hearing officer is the one who makes a decision concerning that. If either the plaintiff, which in this case would be Dr. Cox, or the defendant, which in this case is the teacher, if either one of them is unhappy with the hearing officer's ruling, then that can be appealed to the entire board. And when it comes to the entire board, the board then would hear the evidence. At this point, the board does not know all the details, which is a protection for the process, it's a protection for the teacher, it's a protection for Dr. Cox. So there's details that I do not know and that other board members do not know, and that part is important. But what we have to do tonight is to make a vote on the charges as presented. In other words, when Dr. Cox goes into this, he will read what the charges are, and if those are sufficient that would warrant possible dismissal, then we would have to vote. Now, after the appeal, if someone appeals, Dr. Cox has the right to appeal. The teacher has the right to appeal, and this can go all the way up through Chancery Court. So it's a 5-step process. It's a long, drawn-out process, or can be. So it's not something that you're going to sit here tonight and hear this board vote on details of a particular case. You're going to hear us vote one way or the other of whether or not to accept the charges as presented, that if they are true, that it would be reason for dismissal. And I think that's a brief summary of what Mr. Hull presented week before last now in the work session. But that's in Tennessee code, and there are several different codes that this applies to this. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Cox for his recommendation.
Can I make one interjection there, Mr. Jones? I apologize. Mr. Hughes did ask at the last meeting if it did come back before the board, would there be witnesses presented? And the answer to that is it's not the intention of the statute for that to happen. Now,
No,
a court could send it back for more evidence, but in the board's review, it would just be strictly on the record.
right. No new evidence is permitted for the board. Once the hearing officer hears it, no new evidence comes back to this board. But if it goes all the way to a court, you're right, the court could authorize new evidence to come in. But,
So
but
I apologize for interrupting, but I wanted to
yeah, that's-
answer that question while we were on that point.
Dr. Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Members of the board, I have distributed you copies of the charges for dismissal.
and I will read those charges aloud now as a part of this meeting record. Charges of dismissal, Sullivan County Board of Education, Matthew Hahn. Comes now the Sullivan County Board of Education Director of Schools, Dr. David Cox, and brings the following charges of dismissal pursuant to Tennessee Code Annotated 49-5501 et sec. And Board Policy 5.200 against tenured teacher Matthew Hahn, hereinafter referred to as Hahn. Hahn is a tenured teacher currently assigned to Sullivan Central High School. He obtained tenure with Sullivan County Schools in September 2008. During the 2020-2021 school year, Hahn, as a part of his duties, taught contemporary issues. As a teacher licensed by the state of Tennessee, Hahn, at all times, has remained bound by the Tennessee Teacher Code of Ethics, Tennessee Code Annotated 49-5-1001 et sec. This includes, but is not limited to, fulfilling the following obligations to students. Not unreasonably restrain the student from independent action in pursuit of learning. Not unreasonably deny the students access to varying points of view. Not intentionally expose student to embarrassment or disparagement. Not on the basis of political or religious beliefs. Unfairly deny benefits to the student or grant any advantage to the student. And maintain a professional approach with students at all times. See Tennessee Code Annotated 49-5-1003. Under the Tennessee Tenure Act at Tennessee Code Annotated 49-5013D, conduct unbecoming to a member of the teaching profession or unprofessional conduct can mean disregard for the teacher code of ethics in such a manner as to make one obnoxious as a member of to the profession. Under Tennessee Code Annotated 49-5-501 section, insubordination can mean refusal or continued failure to obey the school laws of this state or to carry out specific assignment made by the board, the director, or the principal. As the facts below will illustrate, Hahn should be dismissed as a tenured teacher with Sullivan County Schools based on his insubordination and repeated unprofessional conduct. Only a few months ago, in February 2021, Hahn received a detailed letter of reprimand. A copy is attached hereto as Exhibit A. Therein, Hahn's unprofessional conduct consisted of questionable judgment in assigning an article for students to read containing inappropriate terms and unreasonably denying contemporary issue students access to varying points of view in violation of the Tennessee Teacher Code of Ethics. Wherein the February letter of reprimand, Hahn was specifically reminded that your job is not to teach one perspective. Your job is also not to ensure students simply adopt your own personal perspective. Your job in teaching contemporary issues is to ensure students learn to seek out and consider varying and credible perspectives. After Hahn appealed the issuance of this letter of reprimand to the Sullivan County Board of Education, the board in a public meeting held in early March voted 6-0 to uphold the letter of reprimand. After Hahn was reminded of his responsibilities and duties by both the board and the director of schools, however, students recently reported that Hahn showed a video containing inappropriate terms to his class later in March. The video at issue, White Privilege, by Kyla Janae Lacey, can be found on YouTube. Within the 3.38-minute video, Miss Janae Lacey recites a poem, a spoken word poem, regarding her thoughts on white privilege and aspects of the same. Though appropriate discussion around concepts like white privilege remained perfectly appropriate for a high school class like contemporary issues, Ms. Janae Lacey utilized several inappropriate terms for a high school demonstrative assignment, including several instances and variations of the F word and racial epithets. Hahn clearly knew that the video's content was inappropriate, especially in light of the prior letter of reprimand, as more than one student confirmed that Hahn remarked to the class that playing the video could affect his job status. One student quoted him as saying, "I'm about to get fired, but I really don't care." Both the sampling of Hahn's contemporary issue students and Mr. Hahn himself were interviewed regarding this incident. Though the school system's processes evidence showing the video was played though the school system possesses evidence showing the video was played with the appropriate language, and those students confirmed they heard it, Hahn claimed that he timed it out and hit mute as such terms were being said aloud during the video. Hahn and the sampling of students also confirmed that no other videos were played or materials assigned that would have offered a contemporary issues students a different perspective than the one offered by Ms. Janae Lacey. Hahn, when interviewed, acknowledged that he had not offered varying assignments or perspectives due to believing that the views expressed by Ms. Janae Lacey and others on white privilege are simply fact rather than opinion. More than one student also reported hearing Hahn make a comment at the end of the class that day belittling certain views which admittedly differed from Hahn's. In talking to another group of students, Hahn was overheard to say, "They don't know anything. Oh, it's fine." As noted within the prior letter of reprimand, Hahn remained more than welcome and offer and discuss appropriate materials with contemporary issues students, which provided a more liberal perspective, assuming he would know that would also require offering and discussing appropriate materials which provided a more conservative perspective on the same subject matter. This crucial and ethical standard was lost on Hahn in early 2021 and appears to be that it's still lost on him now. Therefore, based on the foregoing and citing the grounds of insubordination and repeated unprofessional conduct, the Director of Schools is requesting to move forward with these charges of dismissal against Matthew Hahn submitted on this 10th day of May, 2021, and it's signed by me. Based upon these charges as Director of Schools, I recommend the dismissal of Mr. Hahn. I would also ask that a copy of these charges be attached as an exhibit to the minutes of this meeting. There has been a lot of talk online that accuses me of moving to dismiss Mr. Hahn because he taught anti-racism lessons. Let me be perfectly clear. Sullivan County Schools and I in no way condone racism of any kind. We have encouraged all of our teachers, including Mr. Hahn, to promote an environment welcoming to all students of all races and of all backgrounds. There's also been talk accusing me of moving to dismiss Mr. Hahn because he discussed the topic of white privilege during his contemporary issues class. This is also simply not true. In the charges I just read aloud, in fact, I wrote that appropriate discussions around concepts like white privilege remain perfectly appropriate for a high school class like contemporary issues. These charges of dismissal about Mr. Hahn refusing to provide his students with access to varying points of view, which is required under Tennessee law. And these charges are about Mr. Hahn, again, assigning inappropriate materials to his students. Finally, there's also been talk online that these charges are somehow related to the legislature's passing of a bill dealing with critical race theory in schools. If anyone reads these charges, the actual charges though, it should be clear that they have no relationship to that bill or its related language. With that, under Tennessee Tenure Act, I would ask that this board allow me to proceed with the dismissal process against Mr. Hahn.
Members of the board, Dr. Cox has submitted charges against Mr. Hahn, a tenured employee of this board. The only decision that this board is charged with making at this time is that if any of these charges are true, Mr. Hahn's dismissal as a tenured employee is warranted. Would anyone like to make a motion that if any of these charges are true, that dismissal is proper and Mr. Hahn be notified of this opportunity for a hearing?
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hughes makes the motion to proceed with the process of hearing for Mr. Hahn.
I'll second the motion.
Mr. Iverson seconds the motion. Is there any discussion? If not, we're ready for roll call. Ms. King?
Mr. Gilmore,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
Yes.
Mr. Iverson,
Yes.
Mr. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Dr. Rouse,
Yes.
Mr. Spivey.
No.
Dr. Cox? Dr. Cox, would you please notify Mr. Hahn that this board has voted that if these are true, then dismissal is warranted. Please also notify him of his right to a hearing before an independent hearing officer, should he wish to use that right. That hearing officer is on an approved state list that you will be choosing from, and there is a number of days listed in the Tennessee Code that tells how many days he has to make the appeal, and then how many days he has to actually get the hearing completed. And there's issues that will be settled between the hearing officer if the appeal is asked for, as to how it will be conducted as far as by phone or in person, or if it will be in public or not. This time we'll move to the last item on the agenda, which is board chairman comments. The next school board meeting will be on July the 8th, and we're doing that as a combined work session and school board meeting, I believe, aren't we? So what we agreed on. The meeting will be at 4:30 for the work session part, and then 6:30. Does that meet with everybody's calendar? We have the Summer Law Academy, July the 16th and 17th. Who's going to the academy? We've got 4 of us. You going, Matthew?
Yeah.
You're going for your attorney part, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is Dr. Cox's last official meeting as a board chairman, regular meeting. There may be a call meeting on the budget before July 1st. We went to the budget committee last week. The budget committee did approve, I think 7-1, the budget coming out of that committee and going to the full commission. Part of that budget includes the new pay scale for teachers, the salary equalization pay plan. If anyone is interested in discussion on that, you can see me, you can get a copy of it. It should be already published, but it has to be approved by the full county commission before that actually goes into effect. And at the next county commission meeting, I think they'll be talking about the budget. Takes 2 readings, right, Angie? 2 readings for it to be passed, and then the tax rate would be set after that. If it's not passed, then it may come back to us for changes, but at this point, it was sent through from the budget committee with a 7-1 vote, as we approved later, with the condition that we use any excess sales tax money that comes in for school renovations and for improvements to the school buildings itself. But this time, I would like to present to Dr. Cox a way for him to keep up with us on his time, but he has been with us and has served us well, and we hope that you'll find a place for this in your home.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I really appreciate that. If I may, I'd just like to say, I really do appreciate having the opportunity to serve here as your director of schools, and to recognize the extraordinary talented lead team that I've had the pleasure to work with. And I'd ask the members of our lead team to stand. Would you please? Thank you very much.
And we're not going to change protocol tonight. We'll start with any comments from board members, start with Mr. Iverson.
Just like to thank all the teachers who are able to come out and get the tenure. That was fantastic. I'm really sorry we didn't get the 2020 done before now, but thank you guys for coming out. And just want to make sure that everybody knows that if they couldn't come out tonight, we're going to try it. I think it's August. We're going to try it again. So,
I think it's
fantastic.
August 5th, I believe. If that doesn't
Okay.
get changed, I think that's what it is.
That's it. Thanks.
I'd just like to say a shout out to all the schools at graduation. The graduations were just so very nice, so well organized, and especially those schools that were closing, they did it with such class. It was just a classy act all the way around.
Mr. Hughes?
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our officers. I've worked closely with all of our SRO officers and Mr. Frazier, and our sheriff's department as a whole. We really appreciate everything you do for us, and just wanted to let you know it does not go unnoticed. Thank you.
Mr. Gilmore?
I'd like to once again thank Amber for her work in the early stages of the pandemic. I got to see firsthand the food distribution, and it was incredibly well organized with support from her staff as well as community members. So thanks again for that. It was very important.
Mr. Spivey?
I continue to be excited about the progress that we see at Westridge and then at East. As I said, it's not just about a field, it's about investing in our community. And in that same note, I was very pleased to see the Budget Committee pass that 7-1 and to keep the property taxes the same. And I hope that the whole commission will do the same thing at those votes.
Staying quiet.
I'll entertain a motion that we adjourn.
Motion, Mr. Chairman.